everybody, and thank you for watching this video. As you know, we're trying something a little different and doing a flipped classroom model with the Phonics professional development this month. So I have a very special guest with me here today, real live Caixin alumni, Joanna. Joanna, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Joanna, and I've been a teacher now for about 6.5 years. I live in Chicago now, but I was a teacher at Caixin for 2 years in the kindergarten department, and then prior to that, I taught 2 years at ESL instruction in Korea, and then 2 years at a high school in Chicago. So happy to be here.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Joanna. Today we're going to talk about some of the challenges that you might face when you're teaching phonics. So we're talking about some of the general challenges, some of the challenges that come up throughout the school year, and then look at some example lessons and talk about some tips. So today, again, the general challenges and some of the interferences, and then maximizing your teaching time so that you can address some of the related challenges. First, we're going to talk about some general phonics challenges. What challenges do you have with teaching phonics? So Joanna, what were some of the general challenges that you ran into when you were teaching phonics?
I think, being a teacher in a new country and working with ESL students, I hadn't previously worked with, ELL learners before, and I think there's some general challenges there with just, learning how to address the different needs that they have when English is not their native language. Things like, they're still learning to read and write in Chinese, so that can present some difficulties when you're learning in English as well. So I think that was a big challenge, getting accustomed to that. And then also how to differentiate instruction between different learners, because you do have some learners that are very advanced in phonics and then some that are a lot lower. So I think that, just trying to find activities that worked for their individual needs was a challenge. And I think when I first started, I really felt the need to kind of make sure I was fitting in instruction time for extended periods of time all the time, because I wanted to really make sure that they were ready for reading and that they had the skills that they needed to succeed. So that learning how to sequence and pace the instruction was a challenge as well. And then also getting accustomed to some cultural requirements at the school that I hadn't experienced before, and learning how to adjust to those obligations, and then how to still fit phonics in throughout the year and in an appropriate amount of time in the class.
Excellent. Thank you so much. The instructional challenges, of course, can be the fact that they're English language learners. ELL, ESL is very different than EFL. When you're teaching English as a foreign language, keep that in mind, that it's going to be very small steps. And of course, differentiation, kids who have been learning since they were babies to students that have absolutely no clue what you're saying. So there's a lot of different levels. Joanna, do you have any experience that you can think of? Or are there any particular students that stand out that were posed a unique challenge for differentiation?
Yes, actually. I had a student that was very, very advanced. Both of her parents spoke English fluently, were English teachers, and so she came into K3 with a lot of knowledge. I mean, she could write stories. So when we went through things like learning the alphabet, it was very, very boring for her because she had done it since she was a young kid. So that was a unique challenge, because most of my other learners were pretty average, and then there was some that were lower, and so that presented some challenges as far as how to differentiate instruction.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Those of you watching at home, do you have any differentiation challenges? And then, of course, the pace and sequencing. The curriculum is fairly open. You have bridges, you have these little readers, you have other activities coming up, and then you have Sounds Great or the phonics curriculum, and there's not a clear answer as to what needs to be taught when. Of course, there's the pacing guide, but how that breaks down day to day in your class is something that you as the teacher have to determine, and that can be a bit of a challenge too. All right, so those were some of the general challenges you might face when teaching phonics, but as you know, working at a school overseas, there's going to be specific challenges. So how did time constraints affect your phonics instruction? All right. And Joanna, how did time constraints affect your phonics instruction?
Yes, that is a very good question, because I feel like there was a lot of things that came up that I really didn't expect. Being in a new country at a new school with new cultural challenges. So I think the biggest thing was holidays, and just kind of the pressure to showcase holidays and really dedicate a lot of curriculum time to creating holiday projects and new holiday vocabulary that was kind of interfering. It's challenging to try to know how to fit that in and fit it into the level that the administration wants you to fit it in. Also the school-wide requirements as far as like the holiday school-wide activities, where they were actually pulling you out of the class in order to do big holiday parties or festivals. So those definitely took away from instruction time and was challenging. There was always things that would come up that, again, might not have fit necessarily with the exact lesson or sequence that you had going, but you had to finish a certain amount of pages by a certain amount of time. The Parents' Day, when you're supposed to kind of, again, showcase a lesson for the parents, where the students are showing their parents what they know as far as their English ability. So there was a lot of pressure to practice those lessons ahead of time. You're practicing the lesson that you would do for the parents. So doing the same lesson over and over again definitely takes away from instruction time. And then the last thing I would say is the performance schedule. So while the performance is a wonderful thing and it's such a great aspect for the students in a lot of ways, it does take a lot of time away from your normal instruction. So those were the biggest time interferences, I would say.
Wow, that's a lot of challenges. But I'm really curious to hear more about how you changed your instruction, how you paced your instruction to work with these schedules. Just to summarize what Joanna said here, she talked about the holidays. These are just a few. As you know, there are all sorts of other holidays that might come up or other fun events. And then, of course, the school requirements, from the performances to visitors in your classroom, as she mentioned, the parent days, and maybe even assessments that come up if you're doing them at your school. There's a lot of factors that can come into play here. And the holidays. They're so beautiful, and the kids love them. And part of the value to having a foreign teacher who can bring not just your language, but also your culture with you. And that's part of why they're such a huge, huge part. But that balance of how do you possibly get an instruction while you're in the midst of Christmas frenzy? So there's ways to work around it, though. Joanna is going to show us some tips and sample lessons. What tips do you have about teaching phonics? And do you have any lesson samples that you can share?
So the first tip I would like to give for the challenges I discussed earlier is related to Parents' Day. And like I said, Parents' Day was a lesson that you had to rehearse multiple times. So these kids were getting the same lesson, you know, up to 3 or 4 times, depending on what the administration wanted. So in my lesson, I did have a showcase element, which was like a cooking, fun, vocabulary kind of interaction. But then we also made sure to include a sounds great aspect. So this allowed us to continually practice phonics, even if we had to rehearse it. And the way that we structured the game was where the students it was kind of like a race where the students were dividing into teams, and they were looking for words and categorizing the words based on the word blend. And then the game would progress, and then they would actually have to start spelling those words. So this was something that we were able to do no matter how many times we rehearsed it, because if the kids started to get too familiar with certain words, then we could actually switch out the words and keep using that same structure, but allow them to keep learning phonics and practicing phonics and not remaining stagnant. And then also another way that we were able to practice phonics is like having kids try to sound out vocabulary words, or even if it's the sight words, and asking them what's the beginning sound, or look for ways that you can use phonics, even if it's not strictly from Sounds Great or from the phonics instruction that you have planned. Another big thing I would address too, or I wanted to talk about, is centers. And I think centers is really beneficial because it allows you to do different activities, within a shorter amount of time. So something like, this is a good way for differentiation too, where you can have students working on different things that fit their ability. But something I like to do with centers, like for example, if I had a lot of pressure for them to complete the workbook by a certain time, but they were also practicing performance and there was a holiday and there was just so much going on, I would give the kids that needed to work on their workbooks time to do that during centers, while others would work on phonics, or maybe others were practicing some part of the show. So I think that was helpful to conquer and divide some of the things that different kids needed to do. And then another thing is for performances, I think things like with the script, like when you're practicing the script for performances, I think you can also find ways to practice phonics through that too. Again, like asking kids to try to read a word, or listen to a line that a character has and try to guess the letter sound. So if you're really thinking about how to include it in just those small ways, that's really, I think, what the kids need the most, is not necessarily to have explicit phonics instruction time at every moment, but just to have it for them to be reminded of it. So yeah. That's
super pro tips. Thank you so much. Very helpful.
Yes, no problem.
Sweet. So just to review a little bit of what we just talked about here. So what Joanna was talking about, absolutely teaching phonics in context. There's a lot of different lines of thought with phonics instruction, whether, from being completely systematic and structured all the time to being completely not structured. And so probably somewhere in the middle is good, and finding a balance between those structured times and just normal life occurrences where you can incorporate it as much as possible. And of course, differentiation is always important for students who are still learning their alphabet. They can also still learn phonics. Recognizing a letter is very different than recognizing a sound. So maybe they can't always say T makes the T sound, but if they continue to practice that sound, then they're still learning English. They're still developing the language. So that's the important part, is just get them talking, get them practicing, no matter where they are on their level of development. And of course you can group students, and this can really make it helpful when you're working, not even just in small groups, but even in your classroom, because that's how our brains work. And if you have chunks of students that need support on certain things, informally in the classroom in your instruction, you might be able to throw in some other stuff if you have it more planned and organized in your own head going into things. And when it comes to the pace and sequencing, whether you do formal assessments or not, really good to gather information about your students. And of course, any lesson, just about anything, even if you are just in that informal playtime with the students at the beginning of the day, end of the day, lunchtime. Those are some of the times to take advantage of it the most, sneaking in teaching when they expect it the least. And then they still learn things without it having to be a designated learning time. Joanna, can you talk about these a little bit?
Yeah, so this is just like a really simple example of a way that you can do quick phonics assessment or quick phonics instruction, and there's so many ways that you can do this, but I think one would be like a pen and eraser activity, or like if you have a pen or a pencil, and then just having the students assign, like you assign a letter sound to each side, and then maybe you say like, okay, show me the like at side, and then they would have to tap that or show it that they recognize that is the letter that they hear. And same thing with the body part too, like maybe the head is A and then foot is B, and then you say the letter sound, and then they have to touch it or point to it. And it's just, things like that are really quick, but it also allows you to see where the students are at in that moment.
Very cool. I like that. So now it's time to reflect and review a little bit. Joanna, do you have any last comments, ideas that you would like to share with the group?
I think that the biggest thing I would say to take from all of this is just obviously you want to have curricular sequences and you want to be really systematic in the way that you approach learning. But I think also to sometimes be okay with letting go of that and just knowing that it doesn't, that just the culture and the school and the where you're at doesn't necessarily always allow that, and that you have to adjust, and part of that means finding quick, simple ways to help the students to be reminded. And so I think that would be the biggest piece of advice I would give.
Excellent. Thank you. And yes, I totally agree with Joanna. Go with the flow is a really important motto with things. But within that flow, structuring and planning and organizing and having some sort of method to the madness within your own classroom in your own world. And of course, if you ever need any help with that, planning, sequencing, differentiating, please feel free to contact me. Joanna would be available for support as well. And we are happy to help you. Okay. So as we wrap things up here today, you can hop on Quizlet and test your own knowledge, review things a little bit, and just reflect on what we did here today. So some questions for you to take away and think about: how can you modify the activities in this lesson for your students? Which phonics challenges have you faced most often, or do you foresee as one of the challenges you will face? And how do you plan to overcome any foreseeable phonics challenges? Thank you so much for joining us here today, Joanna. Really appreciate your expertise.
Yes, thank you for having me, and I wish you all the best with teaching and further instruction.
Thank you. Bye-bye.